All right. Whoever's on, it says iPad, maybe I've got.
That's me.
Oh, that's you, Dee.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I know.
No worries.
I'll put my right name in there.
Oh, no worries. I didn't realize you had dropped off the video. All right.
I just ran to go get something to take some notes on.
Okay. Kelly, do you think that Ronnie's going to be on?
I just contacted Ronnie and told him to get on, so he should be on in a minute or two.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
I am going to. I'm going to share screen one here. Do you guys see the first slide from the presentation last week right now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So, and now has it switched to Barney's report here, to Aqua Strategies report? Just want to clarify. Okay, good. So we received, and Barney has received some comments on the report. These were very specific kind of things. So, and Barney did not seem to think that any of it was very difficult to adjust or address. These came from Protect Our Blanco for the most part. One thing I wanted to ask and get the task force thoughts on this was regarding the litigation stuff. So one, I think we agreed. The report kind of calls out Kelly from Save Our Springs as a source on that City of Austin watershed study, and we're going to remove that and just cite the primary source on the report. And but I guess my one big question is, and I'm going to flip and flop between his report and some of the comments that I wanted to bring up. Was, I'm scrolling down, hold on. Related to these two tables here, and these are the cost breakdowns. These are the tables that were presented on the two. Basically, it was costing of the ponds plus some permitting, the pipeline, and we've got a few changes. One is, oh, and Dita's got her hand raised. So Dita, go ahead and ask your question before I move on. You're on mute.
I didn't mean to have my hand raised. I don't know how that happened.
Oh, okay. No worries. I think you can lower your hand. I don't know. You can try. One is, and I'd like to get just start out with this one. My understanding is that the city is moving forward with pipeline construction, and we're just going to consider that a cost no matter what we do moving forward. Is that correct? I see Connie nodding her head. I see Dita grimacing. So I don't know if that's the hand of the pipeline talking. So is that something that's been an official action now that construction is going to move on, Connie or Kelly?
So the council voted months ago to construct the pipeline, and that is what Mr. Palmer is doing right now. Is he's hired a contractor to begin construction as the count. I think the vote was 3-2. And so that's why he's building. That's why he's got the contractor on board right now.
Well, I knew that there was a vote to do the engineering, but anyway, that's Fine and dandy. So the city's going to be capped at 200,000 on that. Still, you're keeping with that agreement.
Definitely, that's correct.
Okay. So Barney, in either one of these scenarios, it looks like, I don't know if the pipeline needs to be taken out because it's the same on each one. It's no longer a question of building the pipeline or not. And then number two, litigation is not necessarily included here on a straight up discharge permit without enough storage to qualify for a TLAP. And Protect Our Blanco, one question was, or recommendation was, why is that left off? So I guess the task force needs to kind of weigh in here. Based on that City of Austin watershed report, that's not exactly what Blanco is going to do, but it's an estimate. How do we want to address this costing of potential litigation? Because it is an unknown, but it is something that could be very significant. So looking for some thoughts on that.
Well, it seems to me like a range would be in order. I mean, there's a minimum number if things just kind of went hunky-dory, and then there's like a not very good number if things don't go hunky-dory, right? So, what's the very minimum that you think you might be able to, I mean, SOS is going to sit there for a decade if they want to, and they will do whatever they will do, but they're probably not going to come off of the de minimis standard under any circumstance. So, that's what their hard line's going to be. And they'll fight that to the end. And they did it in Onion Creek, and it's $1 million plus, I think. I don't know. Does anybody know what Dripping Springs is at right now? Is it 1.3 or something? 1.3 million or whatever. So, I mean, it's realistic money. And, I don't think it should be ignored, but it's a contingency. And I think it's a range. So it's something low to something high. So maybe some city council people could kind of weigh in on that a little. That's my thought.
I have a question, if you can help me understand this. At what point, if Save Our Springs, Protect Our Blanco plans to create, at what point in the permitting process does that happen? So if we're able, Nick, as you have proposed, to try to accept and move toward a phase in so that we can get that done, does that stop the litigation if we have timelines we're meeting and moving in good faith? Or once the construction of this discharge route begins, is that when the legal costs start to stop construction? I'm not sure. I mean, I have this thread of litigation here hanging over me, which I get is real and I understand. I'm just not sure, if there's some way we can avoid that, knowing we're trying to move to this point, understanding that the construction of the pipeline is due to a court-ordered settlement agreement for which we have no option to get out from under. And so I don't know at what point, if there's a way we can avoid it, and if we can't avoid it, when's it going to start?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question, Dee Dee. I think, and I'm not SOS's lawyer by any means, nor do I want to be, right? So I can't answer for any of that, but I think the essence of this is that the pipeline under the TPDES permit would be activated, okay, on a frequent basis. And that's the problem, is that going down the TPDES permit route is the one that is going to be highly contested by SOS. If you go through the TLAP permit process, transition from TPDES, which is where you're at right now, transition that, which Nick has talked to TCQ and has a plan for that, into a TLAP, then there will be no opposition. So the pipeline under the TLAP will simply just serve as a force majeure, which just simply means that when it's flooding outside and Blanco is underwater, yes, you may release effluent into that pipeline. Right.
Yeah.
You know, because you don't have any other place to put it, right? So that is an escape valve. And that's perfectly acceptable from POB's perspective. Now, SOS don't know exactly, but I think they'll go along with it as long as the TLAP is being pursued. The TPDES permit is going to be highly contested all the way through. And I guess that's the essence of it.
Yeah, and the pipeline from, I would say from a potential contested case standpoint, doesn't make any difference if it's a pipeline or it's that existing ditch out there. It's the permitted use of those features under, you know, regular operating situation. Whereas, you know, what I would echo what Joe says, and everything I've heard so far from, you know, Bill Bunch, is that, you know, if you know, the city's pursuing a TLAP, that they're very excited about that. So that would kind of eliminate them suing. I think that probably in terms of more specific to your question, you will know when there's a draft permit issued by TCEQ. I think that's typically when you get that process started with public hearings and requesting contested cases. So right now with that pending application, there's nothing to sue really at this point. Although I'm sure people can think of things to sue about. But I think that in terms of protect our Blanco and save our springs, which would be the two primary parties that would have opportunity with standing to go after the city on this, if the pursuit of the TLAP is the way to avoid litigation. But as we know, the TLAP does incur more costs on storage and things like that. So again, this is where I go back to, you know, kind of, I'm thinking about Mike and specifically on the council, and how does, I don't want to be a fearmonger from the task force, but I think we all have I don't think it's necessarily fearful to point out the risk of litigation, a significant risk of litigation under discharge. But I don't, you know, it needs to be palatable for the council, but I think the council needs to understand that cost. And that's why I'm going back to this table that I'm showing on the screen right now, where it's left off. And I think there's some additional permitting costs associated with the TLAP that are shown here. And I think that the potential litigation costs should be shown on the discharge permit side personally. But again, I don't know if we want to vote. And I saw Gabriel and David both joined. So I didn't see y'all previously, but thank y'all.
Excuse me, Nick. I
Yes.
cannot see, all I can see, I don't know how to get back to seeing the group view here, which is really bugging me. Can anybody help me? Somehow I screwed up my Zoom thing where I can see the screen you have up and I can see you down in the corner, but I can't switch to like a, you know, whatever it is they call it, the little tile
Let me
view.
see if I can help you
There,
out.
like that.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
And I'm gonna try to share again, and maybe it'll reset your.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. It's driving me nuts.
All right. I don't know. You may lose it again, but we're gonna try. Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right. I'm sharing again, Dita. Can you see us?
Yeah, there's no option. I just don't have the little tile icon.
Oh yeah.
It's
weird.
okay, but when you were telling me I was grimacing, I'd kind of like to see what I look like. I can't see myself grimacing, and that's really bothering
you
me.
just want to see. You just want to judge your own facial expression. I know. Just stick a little mirror up there above your screen.
That's the main thing. I want to be sure I'm not like doing too many eye rolls or anything.
Put your mask on, Dita. It's okay. Put your mask on.
Okay, anyway, go forward. I'll just say while I have my mic on, I believe personally that the risk of litigation from Protector Blanco and SOS are very real costs that need to be considered. I mean, I know that they will sue if we pursue this. So I don't know, do we use Dripping Springs as a model and say, you know, okay, $1 million, because I think they're over that now. And it's not done yet. Or do we pick a more conservative number? You know, could we get by with only spending 800,000 on litigation? You know, it's certainly more than the 200. That's the difference between these two cost scenarios here.
I think that probably, you know, from $500,000 to $1 million, so $750,000 in the middle of that. I think that's about right, Dita. But you know, that's just like what we call a swag, scientific wild ass guess. You know,
Yeah,
like, who
right.
the hell knows? But you do know that there's a precedent there. You're dealing with the same player. I don't
Yeah.
think the PLB is not in that boat, but you know, we're not going to do that. But SOS is, you know, and they
Yeah.
do what they do, and we have zero control over those guys.
That's
But
exactly
they
right.
have indicated that all along that TLAP is the way to go here, and they're all for it, and hoorah, hoorah. So Bill Bunch is clapping his hands when we talk about TLAP to him.
So here's a question, Joe, that I still have. And I'm trying to understand the timing and the process for this in terms of the permitting. So we have to have a permit to operate. We should be having a permit under which we are operating for until we can get to a point where we are fully able to function under TLAP. So is the application process always for TLAP? Do we make a decision that we're applying for that, but in order to get it, it comes in phases, and until we hit certain phases, we'll be under the other permit so we can operate? But then that shouldn't trigger litigation as a, I mean, I'm trying to figure out again, how are we permitting here?
It's a transition strategy, right?
Okay.
You're going down one path right now, and you say, look, we want to transition to another one. And matter of fact, Nick, why don't you weigh in here, because he talked to TCEQ about this yesterday. So
great. Help me understand.
Bring it on, Nick.
All right. Well, so I think that what the city really needs to understand is how this can work. And, you know, we had a good long talk with Feroz, and I think everyone on our meeting understood that TCEQ is willing to work with the city to transition to where they want to be. So the permitting process would be phased. We've had some new questions, I think, that maybe I didn't know to ask, or we didn't know to ask since then. And I was on a call with Lewis Heron at TCEQ, who's old hat there, and works with Feroz. And basically it laid out a strategy with him that we could then have the city pursue under, you know, Tom Turk and Feroz to get to where the city would want to be if you want to pursue this TLAP option. So one thing we know for sure is that the money's not in the bank yet to get the stuff built, right? But there are steps in motion to get to that point. So the city's working on financing, but the idea would be that you would, you know, apply for your permit and continue to work on those steps, but being able to operate under your existing situation until those steps are complete. But in order to avoid litigation, the potential contestants would need to see that the city is going to be facing some type of deadline to move to the next phase. So can y'all see my screen here where I kind of threw out this example yesterday afternoon after I talked to Lewis? So basically, it would be some type of hybrid permit, and I'm not sure if it would just be a straight TLAP permit or if it's a TPDES permit that transitions to a TLAP. But the idea would be that you would be operating up to, you know, basically your current discharge for maybe the next year plus. You've got, you know, your current storage, You've got a plant that can produce, you know, a higher quality effluent. Again, I threw these numbers in here. They would change to meet whatever the specs are of the plant. These are not what the plant is currently permitted at, but I think it can produce this. And this would be more of a Ronnie and a Tom Turk question, but I just threw these in here for placeholders. You would continue to seek some authorizations like the one you're working on, the lease for the 46 acres or 45 acres, whatever that is, to reduce the need to discharge, but it would be limited by time. So pick whatever date you want, end of next year, that phase expires. Usually TCEQ has phases that are based on flow, like when you reach a certain flow, you move to another step, but Lewis confirmed that it could be a time limit on here. And again, that time limit is absolutely critical, I think, to avoiding the litigation. So if the city doesn't meet this deadline, then you're under, you know, additional regulation by TCEQ, and you probably have lawsuits. So it would need to be very smartly chosen deadline. But then phase two, this is when you've got your additional storage built, okay? And you're working toward your more irrigation. So, you know, up to your current storage, or up to your current treatment capacity, but you've got your additional storage, which is key. And then maybe 100 acres. And then if you want to move up, if you want to increase treatment capacity, then you've got to have more acres to do it. And then phase four would be sized appropriately. You know, this is just an example, but what I wanted to show was that phase one would be time limited under your current operating scenario. Phase two is where we built things to do that extra storage. So does anybody have questions on this particular approach that I wanted us to kind of consider? Barney, does this make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. You and I had talked about a phased approach, you know, where we take smaller steps to get up to that next phase that gives us time to build storage and identify additional acres of land, but allows discharge in the short interim. And I think that's absolutely the way to go.
I'm interested in David or Gabriel weighing in on the potential to, you know, what POV or would consider or can be concerned about potentially, or other downstream landowners with the potential to go with a path like this, phased path, where maybe, you know, the city's doing everything they can with 210 authorization and acquiring funding, but being able to operate under TCEQ permit.
Gabriel, do you want to comment? You guys hear me
Sorry,
okay?
I was finding my unmute button. Hi, I'm sorry I've been absent for so long. I'm still kind of catching up. I don't know if I'm quite ready to chime in, but I'm getting myself up to speed. So,
All right, thank you.
But I may have something to say shortly. So.
Okay, sounds good.
Well, Nick, I think what you're proposing is a great compromise, is a great way to deal with. I'm so sensitive to the city's situation. You know, after being on that call with the Palmers and TCQ and all the city leaders and city manager and Lonnie, I thought that was a really productive call. And I see where on one side, if the city doesn't go forward with what Mr. Palmer wants, they've got a lawsuit from him. And if they do what Mr. Palmer wants, they've got a lawsuit from SOS or POB or the downstream landowners. So it's a very difficult needle to try to thread. But I think your idea of this kind of hybrid phased permit is a very creative way to get at, I think, the city's intention to not discharge, to really avoid discharge and use irrigation and reuse as the primary way to process that wastewater. But also, as Joe was alluding to, having some force majeure in the meantime, where if it's rainy and you've got those ponds are filled up, that there potentially could be a discharge. I don't know how, SOS is going to respond to that, but as a POB, board member, I think that's a very reasonable approach. If the city says, yes, our intention is long-term, we want a full TLAP, but to get this permit approved and to move us forward towards these solutions that the engineers have identified, we would need to have this phase process. There would need to be the pipe there. So I tend to think we're going to need to all work together on this and really communicate with the two organizations and the downstream landowners to show there is a true intent by the city to avoid this discharge at all costs, and that they're putting the money forward to do the expansion of the ponds and acquire the additional land as you outlined. But I do think, the last thing I'll say is that including some estimate of this legal, potential legal cost is absolutely, valid. And I think that, that does weigh then, at least on the financial side, to really lean towards the TLAP, because I just have seen this happen before, and the downstream landowners that are represented by these groups do not want wastewater in that river, and they will fight it in court. And so that's my view. But I think you've done a good job at trying to thread that needle, and I do appreciate the city's, just having this task force and having this dialogue is so much more productive than being in a contested case or having only the lawyers talking. So I think this is a tremendous process, and I hats off to Meadows and everybody on the task force for working through this, because I think you may have landed on the solution.
Nick, I have one other question. Thank you, David. I have one other question. In the phase one part, does that involve an upgrade to the treatment plant or a change in chemical treatment, or what we're doing to improve the quality of effluent beyond where it is now, in order to be for it to be less detrimental potentially, should we need to do in an emergency a discharge? Is that part of the phase one, something that we need to change?
Very good question. And there's two parts to that. There's one part, and Ronnie can talk about this, hopefully. One part is what kind of water the plant is producing. And the second is, once it hits those ponds, you have your suspended sediment increase because they're not lined. And they're going to go through those ponds before they are discharging. So, and again, the numbers I put in that example were just kind of general good quality effluent, type 1 effluent produced. But the ponds are going to affect that. And so I guess, Ronnie, first off, do you know what kind of water y'all are producing? Are y'all hitting like a 5.5, 2.5 on your effluent out of the plant, or not quite?
Sorry, it's noon and the siren just went off, so I don't know if y'all can hear that, but
A little bit.
I heard you, but I didn't know if you could hear me.
I can hear
no,
you.
Currently, we're still treating water better than the 5525 permit. our latest numbers, that's what I was just pulling up here. I mean, our carbonaceous, BOD for 5 days sitting at a 2. So right now we're producing a 22.051 as far as to put it in terms of, the type of effluent that you've got on your report here.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we're still beating what we're projecting to be our new permit. So again, I know we met with Barney and talked to Barney about as far as optimizing with alum usage to get our phosphorus and nitrogen levels down and such from there. Well, those were things that we were already doing in-house. So again, even with the numbers that you're putting on here in these phases, we're beating those numbers as of right now.
That's excellent. Now, what happens once it goes through the ponds, though, Ronnie?
Yeah.
Isn't that where your effluent is measured, like officially?
Well, our effluent is measured on our discharge outfall, or on our outfall line of the actual clarifier. So that's what's actually leaving the bullseye. Now, what we're starting to do now, being that we're trying to go for that type 2 reclaim usage permit, we're sampling the actual storage ponds. So we're meeting type 1 effluent limitations in pond 1, but we're trying to shoot for type 2 effluent limitations in pond 2, and then so forth. So.
Okay.
So
Well,
I'm sorry.
Go
So I just want to clarify this clarifier. I want to make sure I understand this. So if a discharge has to take place, from where is that effluent coming? Is it coming directly from the plant, from pond 1, or from pond 2? And what do we need to do to so we've got to make improvements in pond 2 if we want to have the level, the caliber of effluent that we're comfortable. If we have to discharge as minimum damage, then we need now in that original phase, part of this, to make the improvements necessary in pond 2 to make sure that any discharge is the best it needs to be.
Right.
Is that right?
Well, and you're looking at a series of multiple acre feet being stored in these ponds. So to even the best treatment processes that we can do, being that they're open ponds and dirt lined and such from there, I guess the easiest way to do that would be take the actual discharge piping from the clarifier itself to tie into what Palmer's doing and such from there, which has been discussed left and right or what. But so in the event that we continually go on the path that we are right now, and we discharge at a pond 2, you'll have type 2 reclaim effluent standards that are being discharged to the river in the event that would be the case.
And so you could replumb that, Ronnie, let's say for interim, that if your ponds are full and you can't irrigate and you see you're going to have to discharge, that maybe you could go straight from the clarifier to the pipeline.
Of course, perfect world, money not an option. That's what I would have shot for from the start. And of course, it's been kicked around and thought about, but more or less a diverter box. So, the effluent water coming out of the clarifier would literally go into a diverter box to where you have a valve going to our reclaimed storage and a valve going to discharge in the event that we ever needed to. So in my previous conversations where I said, well, yes, I mean, I'm not an advocate I'm never going to be an advocate for discharge. I want to use this water and it's got a monetary value to it and such for the city in the future. So I think that's what we need to do. But in the event that we did have to discharge, it would be my standpoint that we would discharge the cleanest water as all humanly possible. And the only way to do that would be to replumb our discharge line, bypassing ponds 1 and 2 and going directly to the pipeline.
Okay.
So that when I tell you that we're beating those effluent limitations of your 5525 by, maybe even 30 to 40% for the, average of the month, then we would want that water to hit the Blanco River if we ever needed it to, versus stored water in pond 2, where due to wildlife and such, your E. coli levels have come up, due to the sun beating on it, or whatever the case, and plant life, that your phosphorus and nitrogen levels have come up. So again, that's always been something that we've discussed in the past.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
So Nick,
Yeah,
hold on, sorry to interrupt, but just to be clear, so that the situation that Ronnie's talking about, the more ideal situation, I believe, is not the what has been designed and what it sounds like is being constructed right now, which is a discharge at a pond 2. So I just wanted to clarify that, make sure everyone's aware of
Yeah,
that.
that would be an added cost,
Yeah.
for sure. But I don't know, are we talking, Ronnie, for something like that, are we talking 50,000 or are we talking $250,000? Or somewhere in between?
I'd hate to throw a number out there and be completely wrong.
Yeah.
I would have to say on that aspect, I have no idea. But I mean, definitely something that we can try to get some type of ballpark to figure out.
Yeah.
I don't think it would be a $250,000 project or whatever the case.
I don't think so either. I think it's a detail that would have to be ironed out, and due to I wanted to make sure everybody be mindful of everybody's time. I have another important question, and I'd like to pose this to specifically the city folks. Kelly, especially if she's still on. Let me see. Yes. Okay. So to remind everyone, and I put this up in the presentation to council, this was what was included in the city's application to TCEQ put together by Mr. Turk, basically to avoid discharge under the TPDES permit, but to avoid discharge as a goal that the city had taken on. And that related to a cumulative pond storage. And I'm sorry, this graphic's a little blurry when I blew it up, but I wanted y'all to see it. Basically, your existing storage and your existing discharge, and he's got 28 acre feet. I wrote 26, but anyway, that's your 9.08. And then moving on to 60 acre feet of discharge, which is 19.55 million gallons, which is slightly more than what Barney had calculated in his recommendation. But the reason for that is that Turk was only showing 26 acres of irrigation. So if you have increased irrigation, you can lower that number. But then moving on, we're talking, Mr. Turk was really looking at less irrigation land and more storage. But these were some commitments that were conveyed to TCEQ and anybody reading the permit about what the city wanted to do. So there was no financing for this underway that any of us, I think, are aware of to see this storage increase. We do have something in process right now, but my big question is whether we go with Mr. Turk's storage and irrigation numbers, or if we go with our task force recommendation for Barney, which is more acres under lease, slightly less storage. Is this, I'm a little bit perplexed as to the economic situation with the city, right? It needs to be something, if you're applying for it, it needs to be feasible that you're going to do it. And we don't know exactly what those infrastructure dollars are going to look like. Right now, there's chance things are getting torpedoed. And so I think we need a real clear picture before we make a recommendation if the city is committed and can be committed to acquiring the necessary funds to add that storage. The irrigation acres, that is just more about will and want to, and you need to get either Kelly or Ronnie out there, hustling land and getting the leases and get your attorney on that. But the storage, that's real money. We know that. And so I'd love to hear what Connie or Dita or Kelly has to say about that, or Mayor Lumpy.
Thanks, Nick. If it ain't one thing, it's your mother. It's always something. You always want answers. You and your answers. I hear you. I can't tell you that I can comment as much on what's available in terms of land. because I don't know what's out there. And I think Ronnie's the one who's been out talking to landowners. I think Nick, you may have done some. Gabriel, you may even know better what your neighbors are back along the route as to whether or not we can acquire the land more easily. It's obviously, if we had the money, it would be a lot easier to control the storage because we'd just build it. We don't have to negotiate with anybody once we get the funding. But I'm with you. I don't know when this application was originally submitted or if this was the recent one that went in, but
This is your current application. This is the engineering supplement to the current application.
okay. Because I think we would hope it would be, that would be more irrigation than, I probably like storage better because it's more a given. It's a control. I don't have to worry about somebody else. I don't have to make sure they're doing something else with the water. I don't have to worry about one month they take enough, the next month they don't. If we calculate what you can store, it's predictable. You know, you can store it. The irrigation in the lands is less predictable, but yeah, it would be less expensive. I just can't comment. Ronnie, I don't know, in the neighbors you've been polling and folks you've been talking to and trying to figure out, are there customers out there that are going to be fairly reasonable that we can, the other thing is the long term. You know, they may say, fine, I'll take that now, but 2 years from now, 3 years from now, not so much. So those are all the variables that I worry about when we're relying too heavily on irrigation and not enough on storage that is a constant. That's not an answer, but.
Well, and this might not be either, but just as an update, I mean, our reclaimed water authorization allows us to find landowners and such. And of course, all of those communications pretty much came to a stop when we realized that we don't have type 1 water that we can sell, give, whatever we want to do. So of course, that's a permit amendment that Tom Turk is currently working on now to incorporate the type 2 that we can get out of the ponds. What we're looking at mostly out there that I've seen, probably say out of the homeowners I did talk to, they are really liking the idea of being a reclaimed water customer. And just for anybody who doesn't understand, as a reclaimed water customer, they take water when they want. They do, like Connie was just saying, they're not mandated to take a specific amount of water. Now, when you talk about TLAP permits, utilizing their land for irrigation and stuff, that's where, you come into a contract where no matter what, they have to use this amount of water and they're mandated by a TCQ permit to do as such. And we're not finding I haven't found anybody yet who's a big fan of being a TLAP customer, but rather just be a reclaim customer, where to say, you know what, when we want the water, we'll take it. And when we don't, then we won't. So, but that's going to be stuff that, once the city expands out, gets everything under control, once we have an actual distribution system to be able to promote that water and be able to sell that water off site, then I think that we'll find a lot more customers that we didn't think of before. But again, I just feel like they're going to lean more towards being a reclaim customer instead of a TLAP customer, but that'll all be, told in future times, I guess. So
Ronnie, what's the status on that lease you were working on with the folks that had put in irrigation infrastructure?
The status on that, where we've gotten all of the necessary information back from that customer. Tom Turk was looking to submit, or at least give me an update this morning or so as far as if there's any more information or what. But as far as I understand, it should be by the end of the week that permit actually gets submitted to TCQ.
Is that 35 acres or 45 acres, something like that?
Well, the property is encompassed like 48 acres total, but they currently have 26 acres of irrigable infrastructure put in, but it is an expandable system.
Okay.
And she is one of these smaller areas, I guess, adjacent to the wastewater treatment plant, where there's other users on the other side. So they've got you've got 26 acres and they would have 26 acres. And this sounds like an agricultural operation. Yes.
And do you think that those folks would be amenable to something like a 7-year agreement or something like that would enable, a TLAP type, that to be controlled under TLAP?
Right. I haven't heard of, a whole lot of resistance about it. And I would think that, and just like anything else, the city of Blanco, as long as TCEQ likes them too, the longer the contracts, the better.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's still in the works and such. So I don't know where that aspect is or whatever the case,
Yeah.
or an update on that one, but I would definitely think that that's something that we would be shooting for. I would think at least a 5-year, even up to a 10-year or such with them.
Okay.
So,
Well, for TLAP, to be clear, they have to extend for the life of the permit. Feroz was saying, I think 7 years on that. But again, that's something to work toward, but that's a really important development and the first domino that could potentially fall. And I'm going to restate my question maybe a little more simply than I stated it prior. Connie, Dita, Kelly, Mary Lumpy, is the city going to be committed to acquiring the necessary financing to get the storage that you guys need to do a TLAP?
Nick, as far as I understand, absolutely, the city's committed to doing that. I don't think there's a counselor out there that does not want the funding to do that. So I think the answer is yes.
Okay. There was a question as to whether you could, though, I guess. That was, I think, Connie's concern. So, with your current debt and budgeting. So that's, Connie, do you have any thoughts on that? You've been the financial guru in your bi-monthly updates or whatever you're sending out.
Oh yeah, that would be me for sure. Yeah, but I think that's all, conservatively, obviously, you worry about will we be able to find the money? We're committed to look for it, to go after it, to do whatever we can do. But I can't tell you, how do I know? We're looking for free money to a great extent. We don't have the ability to finance everything that would be needed to make these improvements. So we're going to have to find some grant funds. We're going to have to find funding sources. And Kelly's done a wonderful job of knocking on every door possible. And we've gotten our PIFs in, hoping that if the infrastructure funds make it down, we'll be first in line, or at least with the initial people coming to the trough. So we're committed to using the resources necessary to explore every possible avenue to find the funds we need. And this would be a priority for spending those funds on these projects. But as well as I do, Nick, who will it be there? I don't know.
Right.
Nick, it's Kelly.
Yes.
First of all, I concur with everything Connie said. But second of all, as far as the funding goes, I think we definitely need to be realistic about that. And you alluded to that earlier. And that's the fact that your enterprise fund can't even pay for your debt now. So to think that the city would incur more debt as a result of this is not realistic. What is realistic is grants, infrastructure funding, that kind of stuff. I would never recommend, the city can't even pay its own debt right now. So I would never recommend that they do another loan until we have control of that.
Well, I have a hard time believing that this is going to be completely free money to get this done. I don't know where that, I'm not saying that there aren't grants, and there potentially, even with infrastructure dollars, maybe it's 50% grant, but there's still going to be some debt, I think, incurred. And so going back to this, where I'm trying to go back to is the idea that, to satisfy a permit that has some kind of time limit on it, we've got to feel like pretty sure we're going to be able to acquire some funds. And before you go through that whole process of writing that permit and say, yeah, we're going to do it, if you don't know how you're going to do it.
Right. I agree.
Hey,
So
Nick,
this is a rock in the
Nick,
hard. David?
Nick, what is what's the delta on the funds? What are we talking about in terms of what would be needed to implement the TLAP as it's been outlined by Barney and Turk? How much?
Well, what we had in here from Barney to get to a basically 15.4 million gallon total, which is a little more than, that is the, scratch that. That's the additional 15.4 million gallon pond that would be necessary for a TLAP under Barney's scenario, not total acres, that's additional. It's 1.8 million with permitting and construction and contingency.
Does
That's your
that
story.
include the storage that the city recently approved, or is that above and beyond that?
That is, well, the city voted to, they were in favor of doubling the storage. That is, but Barney laid out that the scenario one is slightly more than just doubling the storage. And it was $600,000 more than just straight up than building another 9 million gallon pond. So again, the city voted to double the storage, but they didn't necessarily, they didn't have funds secured to do such. They haven't applied funds to that.
And I think when council, what we said is we understand that's a priority. That's what we want to do. We will go after the funding to secure it with that in mind. But to say, yes, that's what we want to do was what we said. But the next question is, okay, now we will set about trying to figure out how we do that. But we didn't have money that we were able to allocate in conjunction with that vote at the same time.
It appears that the city's going to need to
Gotcha.
come up with 1.8 million gallons to get a TLAP that's going to handle 0.225 million gallons a day. Now, you don't need that for your current amount, but I can't imagine that you would build one pond now and save a little bit of money. You might as well just build your pond to last you for your next 10 years, right? So I think that that's the reasonable approach. Which in the grand scheme of their current debt is not enormous, but it's nothing to sneeze at either, The ability to sell type 1 water out of that pond offsets that cost some, but I don't know how the city can figure that in to a financial perspective on the ability to borrow those funds and pay back those funds. I think I did a little number crunching previously and showed, maybe in 10 years you could pay for that by selling type 1 water out of that pond. But this is for finance. I'm not a finance person. So Kelly, let me ask you this question. If the city sees income potential from making this capital investment, is that something that can help ease the burden or help, your accreditor provide that infrastructure money and make it more palatable for the city to take that risk?
So would it be more palatable? Absolutely. If we were able to show a revenue stream. And you talk about our creditor, I believe, and this is just my professional opinion. The reason it's easy for the city to get the water and wastewater infrastructure grants is because they're backed by TCEQ. So if the city were to, renege, TCEQ would be on the hook for the money. So I just don't know if TCEQ is willing to do it again. I'm not sure. But I definitely don't think the city of Blanco is in the position to just go out in the private market and borrow, and bond it like other cities can do.
Nick, there was also a proposal submitted to the Water Development Board for some federal funds that would pay for all of this. At least that's my understanding. Tom Turk was working on that. Have you heard anything about that?
Well, that was the PIF, the project information form that explained these projects. But again, that would be probably a combination of grants and loans from Water Development Board with federal infrastructure dollars. But we don't know how those will be structured yet. That was just putting us in the queue to make sure that Blanco could get them.
With the first round of federal funds there was no match. And so I don't know, you know, we haven't heard the word from Washington yet. They're still fighting over all of it, but we don't know if there'll be a match included or not. I kind of, it's not sounding like there will be. And then of course, there's another pot of money with the Texas legislature right now. And so there's, you know, two other significant pots of money that the city of Blanco could hopefully tap into. But the first one that I got for 500,000, 250 this year and 250 next year, there is no match.
Okay. So I guess the next question is, do we want to lay out a strategy for the city to consider? And that strategy would be, you know, moving toward our initial recommendation, which was a TLAP. And then let's just play this scenario out. Let's say the city, Mike votes, everybody votes, say, yes, we want to go this path. We want to go a phased approach toward acquiring the funds and storage and land necessary to TLAP. You instruct Tom Turk to start working with TCEQ toward that. And I wonder then what the last thing I hear, and we've got Palmer kind of taken care of right now, but TCEQ is feeling itchy to get a permit moving with the city of Blanco. But I imagine Blanco would be real concerned about moving forward with the permit until you know a little bit more about what these federal infrastructure dollars are going to be.
Exactly.
So can we kick the can? I don't know about kick the can, but get in a holding pattern with TCEQ somehow to get them kind of off Blanco's back while you're trying to look for funds. Ronnie's out there hustling water deals, and your attorney's out there trying to make that happen. I don't know. I guess that would be, I think we could ask Feroz, go back. I mean, have Tom, you know, if the city wants to go this path, then we have to start working with TCEQ on a timeline. I guess that's, I'm kind of rambling, but I think that's what would have to happen is we get a recommendation to the city. If they vote in favor of that recommendation, then there's real critical negotiation between the city and TCEQ on how to write that permit. Ronnie, I saw you kind of nodding your head. Does that seem like what you would think would probably have to happen?
Well, yeah, most definitely. I think you've got the schedule of events.
Yeah.
in pretty accurate format, but I mean, it all comes down to financing and where the money is going to be coming from. So, but I'm with you. I mean, it's kind of scary to know that those were put in, and even in my situation, I would say it might come better from a council member Kelly, but as far as to know that the city's got some kind of hold on some financing available to do what we're proposing to do is rather scary too. So, I was going to ask, if you don't mind, like I know Dita had commented on the litigation aspect of it, and in efforts to give council, you know, as much of an accurate number as we possibly could, you know, I know we had talked about adding those numbers in there for the, you know, scenario 2, but is there any way to go, like, you know, she had specified Dripping Springs, or you're looking at other litigation events where we could get some kind of not a swag number, but more of a better, I guess, educated guess as to what we could potentially be spending as a city for litigation on option 2 versus 1?
Well, that kind of goes back to our Joe's swag comment on scientific wild ass yes. So, you know, I think that maybe we ought to vote on that number that we want to recommend in there. I think because it's a range, we could, you know, I think the council and we could all understand at this point that that's just the best guess. I guess at this point where we're at is just to kind of wrap this up because we're kind of at the end of our meeting here. I'd like Barney to address some of the comments that he felt was pretty easy to address with Secretary Blanco in the report, and send a final draft on that, and then adjust this table. And I'm going to throw out, and let's just maybe do a quick show of hands that we say 750,000 is kind of a ballpark number for litigation costs. So is everybody comfortable with that number? And let's just raise your hand or put your hand up if you think that you're comfortable with that number. This would be task force members. Gabriel's a yeah, Dita, Joe. David, are you comfortable with 750 in there? Well, he may not be able. Oh,
He's on
oh,
mute.
he said 800 to, okay, he's comfortable with it. He had to sign off. So Barney, let's put 750 in there on litigation and put an asterisk, say this is a range. And then let's present that. And then is everyone then I'm gonna ask this last question. I can work on wordsmithing this and send everything around, but would everyone be comfortable with me working out a phased permitting path to recommend from our task force to the city that we recommend this is the path that you go? And we can work on, again, the details of that, but is everyone, are there any dissenters in that you think that it's just not going to happen? Or do we want to recommend as a task force a phased path toward TLAP, continue that recommendation?
Well, would this recommendation in the phased be a recommendation specifying like to not have to worry about litigation?
This would be a recommendation that would mitigate risk to litigation. So a phase where you're moving toward a no discharge.
Right. Okay.
So this is theoretical, not specific details, but theoretically. Okay, let's show of hands on a phased path toward TLAP. Okay. All right. So I think with what David said, all right. Gabriel, did you have a question or were you just raising your hand?
I did that thing. I figured out how it worked.
All right.
I was going to ask Dita how to do it. I don't know.
No, but
As soon as this is over, I'm gonna try to go get a bite and see if maybe that's what's.
All right. What were you going to say, Gabriel?
Well, I was gonna say, I was just listening to the commentary, kind of catching up and understanding, like as a person that's kind of I'll just say, like, I'm a citizen and a water user at this point while I'm saying this, like, it freaks me out that the city doesn't have enough money to deal with its stuff right now. Like that's a scary place to be. And when I see these numbers and then hear that there's no security and funding for any of that is also pretty scary. And I'm stating the obvious, I realize, but I also very much think that the most responsible thing to do is the TLAP path and avoiding litigation. And I fully support that, but that's going to be real. I appreciate all the work on the compromise. I think David said that earlier, and someone about it's just a bad place to be between all those things. But I think that the city needs to do the most responsible thing. And then I wonder how as a group or I guess this is more for the council, how do we guarantee to citizens that with a change in leadership and a change of whatever happens in 2 years, that this is the plan that's going to continue to be followed, and this is the path that it's going to keep going down? Is there like some kind of resolution or something that carries over? Because that is also, just looking back over the history of how things transpired, that's kind of how we got here, and that is very unsettling to me. I'm just saying from a completely not anything. I don't know. This is all so much to swallow, but the city has an obligation to do the most responsible path at this point. And I know that there's no guarantee, but is there some kind of other type of guarantee that's not financial, that says to the citizens and says to the community that we are in fact just going to keep pursuing this? I don't know. I don't even know if that's possible, but I don't know if that is a reasonable request either. But that is the thing that I think is just going to, when people look at this and read things, it's just hard to imagine that there's $2 million out there or whatever, you know, to make the plan be reality. So, and I'm not trying to end on a negative note at all. I'm just like, those are the things that like I'm absorbing, and I'm like, geez, is that even realistic? So
this is Kelly Concert. You know, first of all, I'd like to say if every citizen had that mindset, this probably wouldn't be as big of an issue as it is. But what ends up happening is councils flip. And just as easy as you can stick a resolution and an ordinance on the agenda, you can also take it off. That's the reality. And so the first part of that is kind of up to the voters to make certain that they are putting responsible individuals into these council seats, because they make a lot of really important decisions. And it's probably not, you know, the answer you want to hear on how we make things stick, but that's the way you do it, is you make certain that the responsible people, the active people that are actually, you know, don't have their own agenda and are actually concerned about the well-being of Blanco and the river, and you make sure those people get in office. The only thing that you can't undo is a vote of the people, and you can't, anyway, for them, speaking generally, you can't undo that. And if the sitting council gets you into debt through a general obligation bond or otherwise, you can't do anything about that. You have to pay the debt. So that's probably not the answers you wanted to hear, but that's the only thing you can tie the next council to.
yeah, and I think I was, like I said, just kind of, thank you for that, but I just also it's just a lot to bring to fruition.
Sure.
So,
So can I ask something,
Yes.
Kelly? So when you say bring it to the voters, are you talking about like a voter referendum, kind of like the SOS Alliance or the
No.
SOS ordinance, I guess is what it was back in the 90s?
What I was talking about, taking it to the voter, was like a specific bond election where you ask
Okay,
the voter,
a
do you
bond.
want to fund this or not? The unfortunate part with the city of Blanco is I don't know how good your rate or your terms would be, or, you know, I'm sure there's somebody out there that would issue a bond, but you don't think you're going to get as good of interest rate as you do with most
Yeah.
cities.
Okay, all right, thank you. I just didn't know if there was another option when you said, you know, the voters. I didn't know if that was like a referendum or somehow you could solidify that in a way that
Yeah. No,
Gabe was mentioning, you know, that would hold through changing council people.
Sure.
So-
Yeah, many charter cities have referendums and recalls, but I backed up on that one because you're a general law city.
Okay, so there we go.
I'll say two things on this point. If the city does vote, let's say we've got an agenda item with some details on our recommendation, and they vote, and the city says, yes, we're wanting to pursue this path, then all of the energy of folks like Protect Our Blanco and myself, as well as, you know, Ronnie, Kelly, you know, your staff, can be focused on getting lands to be acquired, can be focused on finding the funds and the grants, the opportunities there to try to make that happen, while we're in discussion with TCEQ on, you know, what we can do, what the city can do legally. And the other part of that is, I think there needs to be a real financial analysis of what kind of revenue stream could come off of this enhanced wastewater treatment and reuse system, because that can really offset that debt burden and get it paid down a lot quicker if you're generating revenue off of that. And I think it's something that, you know, right now you're looking at 1.8 million as a flat cost, but not recognizing there could be a revenue stream attached to that. So we would need to clarify that as well. But first thing, what we need to do is find out if you know, the dudes on the council that aren't on the task force, you know, have the, you know, confidence to move forward with that path. So I think that's kind of where we're at. I think we've identified this and laid this out pretty well. And so it's going to be up to, you know, getting that message to the other guys and see where they're gonna land on it. So I want to wrap this up. I really appreciate everyone's thoughts. Gabriel, I think that it was really important to hear what you said there, because, you know, these council members are going to be judged in that court of public opinion too. So as you're thinking about this, and you want to have some staying power to see these things done, that's really important to how this is communicated to your constituents. And there's also consequences if you choose not to. You know, if you just, you know, just say hell's bells and we're going to just discharge into the river, I think there'll be, you know, you'll feel it other places. So, but I think we're as close as we can be right now. I'm going to work on drafting a phased permit recommendation, and I'll circulate it with the task force for comment. And is there a regular city council meeting on the second Tuesday in October?
Yes.
Okay, so let's say we want to get this maybe by Monday. I'll try to get you guys a phased permit approach to evaluate, so that we can have a few days to clarify that, get it on a council agenda, and have Barney wrap up his report with those final revisions that we talked about today. So I think that's our marching orders, and I'll get you guys something. And if there's any questions before then or recommendations, I'd appreciate it.
Nick, if you would,
anything else to say? Yes?
yeah, Nick, will you send me the language you want on the agenda so I can craft it?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
And I just had a
Bonnie?
question on the scenario number 2, the nutrient reduction, what would that consisted of? If that was plant optimization with chemicals and such.
That's right.
Well, if it's the 200,000, it was also the biological nutrient reduction that we had proposed for the primary clarifier, a retrofit there, Ronnie.
Okay. Mm-hmm. But I know as we were speaking with, you know, as Ms. Barron, when I was relaying a question back to her, whatever the case, but if we were to pipe the water directly from the clarifier, that might take away the need for nutrient reduction and utilize those funds to run that pipeline directly to the clarifier. So, yeah.
I agree, and I hear you, and someone probably ought to have a conversation with Tom Turk about the design and whether the design could be modified to take water directly from the wastewater treatment plant instead of running it through Pond 2. Certainly the water quality in the effluent or in the discharge would be a lot better in that scenario.
Yeah, I'll get with him and Gary right after we close this meeting, and I'll keep you updated as a task force as far as what's going on with that. I know it's something that Tom and I have been kicking around quite a bit, but I don't think that we've ever actually put numbers on it, but it probably wouldn't be too much to be able to do something like that.
Yeah,
I agree.
I think either way, that number is kind of a placeholder, and we could vote to reduce that number a little bit if we need to, because, you know, basically you're looking at either BNR or you're looking at replumbing that system. There's going to be some cost there. The category is nutrient reduction, you know, so we could lower that a little bit to 100,000, and to make it a little more fair, you know, split the difference perhaps, if that makes you more comfortable.
Yeah, I guess it will. I think you're perfectly right. We'll leave it as a placeholder for now, and I mean, we'll get some more information if we want to, you know, manipulate it one way or another.
Yeah, Barney does need to wrap this report up though, so I would put, Barney, maybe we put that as 100,000, but put a range on there. Say there's you know, several ways that could be achieved some nutrient reduction.
Yeah, I'm good with that. I do think, though, on that discussion of costs earlier on running the pipe directly from the wastewater treatment plant with some sort of valve like Ronnie was talking about, you know, there's some extra pipeline and there's some extra valves and equipment, but gosh, that's going to be less than $100,000, I would think.
I would think so as well.
David said a couple of things, and I'm going to leave it there, and we'll finish this meeting. But he said, let the task force know that POB and I'm sure WBWA would help find funds for TLAP. There needs to be a very detailed stipulation for situations when discharge would be allowed in such of a phased permit. I think that that's all fine and agreed upon, and that we could work on that. Just to be clear, Kelly, this is the last question, and David just can't talk. He's stuck on mute. Is the current water, wastewater, those bonds that y'all have or loans with Water Development Board, is that around 16 million? Is that your current debt load right now?
No, it's about 4 million.
4 million.
Mhm.
Okay. 4 million. All right. Anything else? Are we, this is a very productive meeting, pretty quick too for all these big decisions. So I appreciate it. I'm not seeing any hands or mute buttons going off. Thank you guys so much. We're getting close to wrapping up this very important phase of our work. And then we've got more work to do, but good meeting. Thank you guys. Have a great day.
Y'all take care.